The Geriatric Garage Band. Chapter 1. The text message that changed everything. I was 73 years old when I received the text message that would upend my peaceful retirement. This, in itself, was remarkable, because I'd only learned to text about 6 months prior. And even then, my messages mostly consisted of random emojis, sent accidentally while trying to find the spacebar. The message was from Eddie Kowalski. Eddie bloody Kowalski. I hadn't heard from him in 47 years. Not since 1977, when our band, the Velvet Hammers, had imploded spectacularly at the Riverside Community Center's Battle of the Bands. We'd been 26, full of dreams and terrible hair, convinced we were going to be bigger than the Beatles. Instead, we'd become bigger than our egos could handle, which is saying something. The text read, "Frank. It's Eddie. Remember our promise? Time to make it happen. Call me." I stared at my phone, which my daughter had insisted on upgrading to something called a smartphone, though I found it rather condescending. What made this phone smarter than me? It couldn't even make a decent cup of tea. "What's wrong, Dad?" Sarah asked from the kitchen doorway. She was 48 and had inherited my suspicious nature, along with my unfortunate nose. "Nothing," I said, which is what you say when you're 73 and something is definitely wrong, but you don't want your children staging an intervention. "You're making that face." "What face?" "The face you make when Mum suggests going to Derek and Linda's for dinner." She had me there. Derek was my son-in-law. And while I'd never say this out loud, he had the personality of unsalted porridge. Linda was his mother, and she collected ceramic cats. Not just owned them. Collected them. Their house looked like a feline-themed gift shop had exploded. "It's just an old friend," I said. "You don't have old friends. You have Gerald from the pub quiz." "I have friends. Gerald doesn't count. He thinks the capital of France is F." I couldn't argue with that. Gerald was lovely but thick as 2 short planks. I looked at the message again. Our promise. God, I'd forgotten about that. Summer of 1976, sitting on Eddie's mum's back porch, drinking warm beer and dreaming big. We'd sworn that even if we didn't make it big, even if life took us in different directions, we'd reunite when we were old and record one proper album. A swan song. A middle finger to Father Time. Of course, that was before the incident with Maggie Thornton, Eddie's crush and our lead singer. Before the shouting match. Before Eddie had called me a talentless hack with delusions of adequacy. And I'd responded by throwing his bass guitar into the duck pond. Good times. My phone buzzed again. "I know you saw my message. I can see the little check marks. Call me, you coward." Despite myself, I smiled. Eddie always did have a way with words. I pressed the call button. It rang twice. "Frank Martinez, as I live and breathe," came Eddie's voice, raspier than I remembered but unmistakably him. "Took you long enough." I was considering my options. "What options?" "You're retired. Your biggest decision today was probably whether to have 1 biscuit with your tea or 2. I had 3, actually. Living on the edge." He laughed. That big, wheezing laugh that used to fill every room he entered. It made something warm unfurl in my chest, something I'd forgotten was there. "We're doing it, Frank. We're recording that album. Eddie, don't Eddie me. We made a promise. We shook on it. That means something. That was nearly 50 years ago. We were drunk. We were inspired. There's a difference. You called me a talentless hack. You threw my bass into a pond. It was a very nice pond." There was a pause, and then we were both laughing, great gasping laughs that probably weren't good for either of our hearts. "Listen," Eddie said, his voice softening. "I'm not getting any younger, Frank. None of us are. And I've got some health stuff going on. Nothing dramatic, just the usual falling apart that happens when you refuse to die gracefully. But it made me think. We had something. You and me. Something real. And we let it go because of pride and stupidity. I don't want to die wondering what could have been. I looked out the window at my small garden, at the bird feeders Sarah had installed so I'd have something to do. This was my life now. Watching sparrows, doing crosswords, pretending to enjoy Derek and Linda's company. It was comfortable. It was safe. It was boring as hell. Okay, I said. Okay? Let's do it. Let's record the bloody album. Eddie whooped so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. In the background, I could hear someone. Probably his wife. Shouting at him to calm down before he gave himself an aneurysm. Right, he said, slightly breathless. First things first. We need the band back together. All of us. My stomach dropped. Eddie, no. Frank, yes. She won't want to see me. Maggie's agreed already. I called her first. Of course he did. Maggie Thornton, now Maggie Castellano, the girl who'd come between us. Except she hadn't really come between us at all. We'd done that ourselves, two idiots fighting over a girl who'd been clear from the start. She wasn't interested in either of us that way. We'd just been too young and stupid to listen. And Tommy? I asked, thinking of our drummer, Tommy Chen, who'd wisely stayed out of the whole mess. Tommy's in. Lives in Brighton now. Runs a fish and chip shop, if you can believe it. Says he's been practicing on buckets when business is slow. God. Yeah. So it's just you we were waiting on, Frank. The final piece of the puzzle. I closed my eyes. Opened them. Looked at my garden again. At the life I'd carefully constructed. Small and safe and utterly predictable. When do we start? I asked. Chapter 2. The reunion. Or, 4 elderly people shouldn't stand for this long. Eddie had suggested we meet at the old Riverside Community Center, which I thought was either deeply poetic or deeply masochistic. Possibly both. Sarah had driven me, which meant enduring a 20-minute lecture about taking my medications, and not overdoing it, and remembering that I'm not young anymore. I'm aware I'm not young anymore, I'd said. My knees remind me every morning with a sound like a cement mixer. I'm just saying, Dad. This is great that you're doing something fun, but you've had 2 heart incidents. They were palpitations. And your doctor said to avoid stress. My doctor is 12 years old and thinks a balanced diet means eating chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs and regular ones. She pulled up to the community center and gave me the look. The I'm your daughter but I'm also basically your mother now look. I'll be fine, I said, softer. I promise. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all. I watched her drive away, then turned to face the building. It looked smaller than I remembered. Shabbier. The paint was peeling, and someone had graffitied a rather impressive anatomical drawing on the side wall. Though impressive mainly for its ambition rather than its accuracy. Still looks like shit, doesn't it? I turned. Eddie Kowalski stood behind me. And for a moment, I couldn't speak. He'd aged. Of course he had. We all had. But seeing it was different from knowing it. His hair, once thick and dark, was white and wispy. He'd shrunk, somehow, become smaller inside his own skin. He leaned heavily on a walking stick, and his hands shook slightly. But his eyes. Those were the same. Sharp and bright and full of mischief. You look terrible, I said. You look worse. Like you've been dead for 3 days but nobody told you. We stood there. 2 old men trading insults like we were 26 again. And then Eddie opened his arms and I stepped into them. He smelled like peppermints and Old Spice, and his hug was surprisingly strong. Missed you, you old bastard, he said into my shoulder. Missed you too, I said, and meant it. We separated, both blinking a bit too much, and then a voice behind us said, well, isn't this touching? Should I come back later, or are you two finished with your moment? Maggie Thornton. Maggie Castellano. Stood at the entrance to the community center, and sweet merciful Christ, she looked fantastic. She'd aged too, obviously. None of us were immune to time's relentless march. But she'd aged the way some people do in films. Gracefully, elegantly. Like she'd made a deal with the universe to go easy on her. Her hair, once a wild black mane, was silver now, cut short in a style that probably had a fancy name. She wore jeans and a leather jacket and looked like she could still front a rock band without breaking a sweat. Maggie, I said, my voice coming out slightly strangled. Frank. You've still got that deer in headlights look. Some things never change. Eddie laughed. Go easy on him. He's fragile. I'm not fragile. You just had a little cry during our hug. That was hay fever. It's December. Maggie walked over and I braced myself for, I don't know what. An awkward handshake? A formal nod? Instead, she grabbed my face with both hands and kissed my forehead. It's good to see you, Frank. Really good. You too, I managed. Right then. Eddie clapped his hands together, which turned into him grabbing his walking stick for balance. Tommy's already inside. He brought his buckets. This should be interesting. The community center looked exactly as I remembered it, except more depressing. The floor tiles were cracked, the fluorescent lights hummed ominously, and it smelled vaguely of old gym socks and disappointment. Tommy Chen sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by 5 plastic buckets arranged like a drum kit. He was smaller than I remembered. We all were, weren't we? But his face lit up when he saw us. The band's back together. He stood, wobbled slightly, then sat back down. Okay, standing is hard now. But emotionally, I'm standing. We gathered around him like pilgrims at a shrine, 4 elderly people staring at some buckets and contemplating our mortality. So, Eddie said eventually. We should probably talk about the elephant in the room. There's no elephant, Maggie said. There's definitely an elephant. If you mean the fact that you two acted like absolute pillocks over me 47 years ago, I don't see how that's relevant now. See? The elephant. Maggie sighed. Fine. Let's address it. Frank, Eddie. I was never interested in either of you romantically. You knew this. I told you this repeatedly. You chose to make it weird anyway, destroyed our band, and didn't speak for half a century because you both had the emotional intelligence of turnips. That's harsh, I said. But fair, Eddie admitted. It's ancient history, Maggie continued. We were kids. Now we're old, possibly dying. I'm not dying, Tommy interjected. Probably dying, and we have a chance to do something we always dreamed of. So I suggest we act like adults, which admittedly none of us have much practice with, and make some bloody music. There was a long silence. Also, she added, I'm a lesbian. Have been since forever. Which you'd have known if you'd bothered to ask instead of having a decades-long strop. Eddie and I looked at each other. Did you? I started. No idea, Eddie said. None? Not a clue. Good talk, Tommy said from his buckets. Maggie laughed. That same rich, full laugh I remembered. And suddenly we were all laughing. The 4 of us, cackling like lunatics in a rundown community center, and it felt like no time had passed at all. Right, Eddie said, wiping his eyes. Shall we make some terrible noise? Please, I said. I thought you'd never ask. Chapter 3. Practice makes. Well, practice makes noise. Whoever said you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Clearly never met four elderly people trying to remember how to play instruments they'd last touched during the Carter administration. I'd brought my guitar. The same Fender Stratocaster knockoff I'd played in the Velvet Hammers, lovingly maintained but barely touched in decades. Holding it again felt like shaking hands with an old friend who'd gotten heavier and less forgiving. Eddie had a bass. Not the one I'd thrown in the pond. Which he still brought up, incidentally, at least 3 times per practice session. But a newer model that looked expensive and intimidating. Tommy had upgraded from buckets to an actual drum kit, though he'd kept one bucket for artistic purposes. And Maggie had a microphone and a voice that, even at 75, could strip paint off walls. In a good way. Our first practice session was, to put it diplomatically, absolutely bloody awful. No, Eddie shouted over the cacophony. We're in 4/4, not whatever dimensional rift you're playing in. I am in 4/4, I shouted back. Then why does it sound like a cat having an argument with a lawnmower? Maybe your bass is out of tune. My bass is perfectly tuned. I have an app. Your app is lying to you. Maggie held up a hand. We stopped, grateful for the silence. Gentlemen, she said, with the patience of a saint, or possibly someone heavily medicated, we need to accept some fundamental truths. 1. We're old. 2. We haven't played together in 47 years. 3. We weren't that good to begin with. Hey! Tommy protested from behind his drums. Tommy, you're playing with one bucket. Your opinion is noted but disregarded. The bucket adds texture. We ran through our old catalog. Songs with titles like Midnight Motorcycle and Susan's Gone and Revolution in the Supermarket. All of which seemed much cooler when we were 26 and high on youth and cheap beer. They sounded, to put it mildly, dated. We can't perform these, Maggie said after our third attempt at Revolution in the Supermarket, a song that was supposedly about rising up against consumerism, but was really about Eddie being annoyed that Tesco had discontinued his favorite crisps. Why not? Eddie asked, wounded. Because they're rubbish, Eddie. They were rubbish then. They're rubbish now. Susan's Gone is a classic. Susan's Gone is about your ex-girlfriend's cat running away. It has 3 chords and 1 verse that you repeat 7 times. That's called minimalism. It's called lazy. I tried not to laugh and failed. Eddie glared at me. You think it's funny? You wrote half of these. I know, I said. That's why I'm laughing. We took a break, which really meant we all needed to sit down before our various body parts staged a rebellion. Tommy produced a thermos of tea. Proper tea, none of that herbal nonsense. And we sat in a circle like a support group for washed-up musicians. Maybe, I said carefully, we should write new songs. Everyone looked at me. New songs? Eddie said, as if I'd suggested we fly to Mars using umbrellas. Why not? We're different people now. We've lived entire lives. Surely we have something new to say. I don't know if my brain works like that anymore, Tommy said. Last week I forgot my own phone number. We all forget things, Maggie said. That's normal. But Frank's right. We can't just be a nostalgia act. If we're doing this, we should do something that matters. Eddie was quiet. Which was unusual. He stared at his bass, running his fingers over the strings without making a sound. I've been writing, he said finally. Since the diagnosis. We all went very still. What diagnosis? I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. Parkinson's. Early stages, they say, which is doctors speak for. You're screwed but not immediately. That's why I wanted to do this now. While I still can. The words hung in the air like smoke. Tommy reached over and squeezed Eddie's shoulder. Maggie's eyes were suddenly very bright. Does Alice know? I asked. Alice was his wife of 43 years. A woman with the patience of Job and the tolerance of a saint. Of course. She's the one who suggested I call you Lot. Said I'd been moping around the house like a sad dog and needed a project. He looked up at us, and his smile was wobbly but real. So. What do you say? Want to help a dying man make one last album? You're not dying, Maggie said firmly. We're all dying, Tommy said. Just at different speeds. Very philosophical, Tommy. I've been reading Sartre. Have you understood any of it? Not a word. But it makes me feel sophisticated. Eddie laughed, and the tension broke like a fever. We spent the next hour sharing songs we'd written. Terrible, wonderful, heartbreaking songs about love and loss and the price of prescription medications. About grandchildren and grief and the strange vertigo of being old in a world that moves too fast. By the end, we had the skeleton of something real. Something that mattered. We need a producer, Maggie said. Someone who knows what they're doing. I know a guy, Tommy said. Runs a recording studio in Brighton. Owes me a favor. What kind of favor? I didn't call the police when I found him stealing chips from my shop. That's not really a favor, Tommy. He was stealing a lot of chips. We scheduled our next practice for the following week, which gave us all time to pretend our backs didn't hurt and our fingers weren't cramping. As we packed up, Eddie pulled me aside. Thanks for this, he said. For coming. For giving an old fool another chance. You're welcome, I said. Though technically, I'm the fool. You're just old. Tosser. Wanker. He grinned. We're going to be brilliant, Frank. Or die trying. Those are our two options, are they? At our age? Always. Chapter 4. Family interference. And other acts of love. The problem with doing something interesting in your 70s, is that your family immediately assumes you're having a breakdown. I'd been practicing daily. My guitar and I reacquainting ourselves like estranged lovers, trying to remember why we'd been attracted in the first place. My fingers ached. My shoulder ached. Everything ached, really, but it was a good ache. A purposeful ache. Sarah noticed immediately. What's that? She asked, appearing in my doorway like a disapproving ghost. What's what? That. She pointed at my guitar. You're playing again. I've always played. You haven't touched that thing in 20 years. I play sometimes. Sometimes does not count as musical practice, Dad. What's going on? I should have told her then. Should have explained about Eddie, about the band, about the album. But I'm 73 and still haven't learned how to talk to my children like they're adults. Just mucking about, I said. She gave me the look. The one that says I know you're lying, but I'm going to let you think you've gotten away with it. Okay, she said. In a tone that meant it was very much not okay. Well, don't overdo it. You know what the doctor said about stress. After she left, I got a text from Eddie. My daughter thinks I'm having a midlife crisis. I wrote back. We're 73. If we're having midlife crises, we're planning to live to 146. Good point. Want to be crisis buddies? Only if we can get matching leather jackets. Deal. The next family intervention came from my son, Marcus, who lived in Leeds and called approximately 4 times a year. Birthdays, Christmas, and twice randomly to ask about the stock market as if I knew anything beyond. It goes up and down. Dad, he said over the phone. Sarah says you're acting weird. I'm not acting weird. I'm acting alive. She says you're playing guitar for hours every day. Is that illegal? It's concerning. You're not young anymore. Marcus, I'm aware of my age. My body reminds me every time I try to stand up. I just don't want you to hurt yourself. Or have another heart episode. They were palpitations. The doctor said. The doctor is a fetus with a stethoscope. There was a long pause. Then Marcus sighed. You know we worry about you. Especially since Mum. He didn't finish. Didn't need to. My wife, Patricia, had died 6 years ago, and the grief of it still sat in my chest like a stone. The kids thought I'd been in a fog ever since, drifting through days without purpose. They weren't entirely wrong. I know, I said, softer. And I appreciate it. But this music thing, it's good for me. It makes me feel like myself again. Okay, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. Just be careful, yeah? Always am. After we hung up, I sat with my guitar and thought about Patricia. She'd loved music. Not in a serious way. She couldn't carry a tune to save her life. But she'd loved listening to me play. Used to say it was how she knew I was happy, when my fingers found their way to the strings. I'm happy again, love, I said to the empty room. Finally. The guitar didn't answer, but I played anyway. Meanwhile, Eddie was dealing with his own family drama. His wife, Alice, was supportive but practical. A dangerous combination. You need to pace yourself, she told him at our next practice, having driven him to the community center like a mother dropping off a teenager. The doctor said. I know what the doctor said, Eddie interrupted. No stress, lots of rest, avoid excitement. Basically, sit in a chair and wait to die. That's not what he said. It's what he meant. Alice looked at the three of us. Me, Maggie, and Tommy. As if trying to determine whether we were a good influence or a bad one. We probably weren't helping by standing there looking guilty. Just don't let him overdo it, she said finally. He's stubborn. I'm right here, Eddie protested. I know. That's why I'm talking about you instead of to you. After Alice left, Eddie slumped into a chair. His hands were shaking more than usual. Is this stupid? He asked. Am I being stupid? Probably, Maggie said. But we're all being stupid together, so it's fine. My daughter called me last night. Cried. Said she's worried I'm not taking my health seriously. Are you taking your health seriously? I asked. Of course. I take more pills than a pharmacy. I do my exercises. I eat things that taste like cardboard because apparently that's good for me. But I'm also trying to live, you know? While I still can. Tommy nodded. My son thinks I'm having a breakdown. Suggested I take up gardening instead. Gardening? As if growing tomatoes is an acceptable substitute for rock and roll. My wife fully supports this, Maggie said. But mainly because it gets me out of the house. She's rediscovering what it's like to have personal space. Yesterday she called it blissful. We laughed, but it was hollow. We were all fighting the same battle. The well-meaning concern of people who loved us, but couldn't understand that being safe wasn't the same as being alive. Here's what we're going to do, I said. We're going to be sensible. Take breaks. Listen to our bodies. Not push too hard. Agreed, Eddie said. But we're also going to finish this album. Because we promised we would, and because we deserve to. Also agreed. And if we die in the process, let's try not to die, Tommy suggested. Right. Let's try not to die. Good plan. We practiced for 2 hours that day. Then we all went home and slept for 3. Chapter 5. The recording. Or, how we accidentally made something good. Tommy's friend with the recording studio turned out to be a 28-year-old named Zach, who looked like he'd never seen sunlight and lived entirely on energy drinks and anxiety. So you're the Geriatric band, he said when we arrived. We prefer experienced, Eddie said. Or vintage, Maggie added. Or still alive despite the odds, I suggested. Zach blinked at us. Cool. Well, the studio's in the basement. Watch the steps. They're steep. The stairs nearly killed us. Tommy had to stop twice. Eddie needed his walking stick and my arm. Maggie made it down fine but spent the next 5 minutes complaining about her knees. Maybe this wasn't a great idea, Zach said, looking genuinely concerned. We're fine, we said in unison, all of us clearly lying. The studio was small but professional. Soundproofed walls, proper equipment, the works. Zach explained the recording process, while we nodded and pretended to understand what he was saying. Words like compression and EQ and digital interface washed over us like a foreign language. Basically, Zach said finally, you play, I make it sound good. Questions? Can we sit down while we play? Tommy asked. Sure. Can I have tea? Eddie asked. I'll make some. Do you have biscuits? I asked. Zach stared at us. What have I gotten myself into? The experience of a lifetime, Maggie said. Or possibly a very long afternoon. Hard to tell. We started with Yesterday's Tomorrow. A song Eddie had written about looking back on your life, and realizing you've become the person you used to make fun of. It was sad and funny and honest, and it took us many takes to get right. My fingers won't cooperate, I said after the 9th attempt. Join the club, Eddie muttered. His hands were shaking badly now, and I could see the frustration in his face. Take 5, Zach said. Or 20. Or however long you old people need. We're not that old, Tommy protested. You literally just asked me if there's a nap room. Did you answer? There isn't. Pity. We took a break. Eddie sat in the corner, staring at his hands like they'd betrayed him. I went over and sat beside him. You okay? No, he said. I'm pissed off. My brain knows what to play. My hands won't listen. It's like being a prisoner in my own body. We can take more time. Do this in stages. I don't want more time. I want to do it now, while I still can. I didn't know what to say to that. The truth sat between us, heavy and undeniable. Eddie was running out of time. We all were, but him especially. Then let's do it, I said. Whatever it takes. We'll get there. We went again. And again. And again. And on the 23rd take, something clicked. My fingers found the rhythm. Eddie's bass locked in with Tommy's drums. Maggie's voice soared over all of it, turning our simple little song into something that mattered. When we finished, there was silence. Then Zach said, "Holy shit." What? We asked in unison. That was actually good. Like, really good. We looked at each other, hardly daring to believe it. Play it back, Maggie said. Zach did. And he was right. It was good. Raw and rough around the edges. But real. Honest. The kind of music that only comes from people who've lived long enough to have something to say. We sound old, Eddie said. We are old, I reminded him. I mean, we sound old in a good way. Weathered. Like good whiskey. Speak for yourself, Tommy said. I sound like a bucket. You brought the bucket, Tommy. Yes, but I didn't think you'd actually let me use it. We recorded 3 more songs that day. Alice. Eddie's love letter to his wife. The garden party. Maggie's meditation on aging and invisibility. And Still Here. My defiant middle finger to mortality. Each one took multiple takes. Each one tested our patience and our bodies. But each one was worth it. As we packed up, Zach said, "You know, when Tommy told me about this, I thought it would be a joke. Old people mucking about, playing it being musicians. And now? Maggie asked. Now I think you might actually have something. It's not polished. It's not perfect. But it's real. And real is rare these days. We left the studio tired, aching, and happier than we'd been in years. Same time next week? Eddie asked. Absolutely, we said. We had an album to finish. Chapter 6. The Setback. 3 weeks into recording, Eddie collapsed. We were halfway through Midnight Redux, a reimagining of our old song Midnight Motorcycle. Now about trying to remember where you parked at the supermarket. When Eddie went white, wobbled, and crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Eddie. I dropped my guitar and ran to him. Well, ran is generous. I moved with urgency while my niece filed formal complaints. Maggie was already there. Phone out. Calling an ambulance. Tommy helped me roll Eddie onto his side. He was breathing. Thank God, he was breathing. But unconscious. Is he having a stroke? Tommy asked, voice high with panic. I don't know. Should we do something? We are doing something. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes, which felt like 7 hours. They bundled Eddie onto a stretcher, asked us questions we couldn't answer, and disappeared into the night with sirens wailing. We stood in the empty studio, 3 old people in shock, and nobody knew what to say. Alice called 2 hours later. Eddie had had a seizure. A complication of his Parkinson's, the doctors said. He was stable but needed to stay in hospital for observation. He's asking for you, Alice said. Says you need to finish the album without him. That's ridiculous, I said. That's what I told him. But you know Eddie. Stubborn as a mule. I visited him the next day. He looked smaller in the hospital bed, hooked up to machines that beeped and whirred like disapproving robots. You look like shit, I said. You should see the other guy, he rasped. There is no other guy. You collapsed on your own. My body's the other guy. And it's winning. I sat in the uncomfortable chair all hospitals seem to buy in bulk. Alice says you want us to finish without you. You should. We're not finishing without you, you idiot. Frank, no. We started this together. We'll finish it together. Even if it takes months. Even if we have to record your parts 1 note at a time. We're not leaving you behind. Eddie's eyes got suspiciously bright. You're going to make me cry, and I've already humiliated myself enough for 1 week. Then don't cry. Just get better. I'll try. No promises. He was released 3 days later with new medications and strict instructions to take it easy. Which, of course, Eddie interpreted as return to the studio immediately. Absolutely not, Alice said when he suggested it. I'm fine. You had a seizure. A small seizure. There's no such thing as a small seizure, Eddie. In the end, we compromised. We'd record at Eddie's house, in short sessions, with mandatory breaks. Zach lugged his equipment over, rumbling, but secretly pleased to be part of what he now called the coolest project I've ever worked on, geriatric or otherwise. We set up in Eddie's living room, surrounded by photos of his life. Wedding pictures, kids, grandkids, a life well lived. It felt right, somehow. More intimate. Like we weren't just making an album but documenting something important. From the top, Eddie said. Bass in hand, determination in his eyes. We played. Chapter 7. The album launch. Or, how 4 old fools became legends in their own living room. 2 months later, we had an album. It wasn't perfect. There were rough edges, timing issues, moments where you could hear Tommy's bucket more prominently than anyone would have liked. But it was ours. 10 songs that captured everything we'd lived through, everything we'd learned, Everything we wanted to say before we ran out of time. Zach had worked miracles with the mixing, somehow making us sound both polished and authentic. It's like if the Rolling Stones retired to a nursing home and decided to tell the truth, he said, which I chose to take as a compliment. The question was, what now? We should release it, Maggie said at our final listening party. Which was really just the four of us in Eddie's living room with tea and an alarming quantity of biscuits. Release it where? Tommy asked. It's not 1977. We can't just press records and sell them at gigs. We put it on the internet, Maggie said. As if this were obvious. We all stared at her. The internet? Eddie said carefully. Like he was addressing a child who'd suggested building a rocket to the moon using cardboard boxes. Yes, Eddie. The internet. Spotify, Apple Music, all those streaming services my grandkids keep talking about. I don't know how to do that. None of us do. But Zach does. Zach did indeed know how to do that. Within a week, the Velvet Hammers, Still Here, was available worldwide, complete with album art featuring a photo of us that made us look dignified rather than decrepit. Photoshop, I suspected, but I wasn't complaining. Now what? I asked. Now we wait, Zach said. See if anyone listens. 3 people listened the first day. I knew because Zach had set up analytics, and he showed us the dashboard on his laptop. 3 people, Eddie said. Probably our kids checking that we didn't embarrass ourselves. My wife counted twice, Maggie admitted. She played it through, then played it again to see if it got better. Did it? Tommy asked. She said the second listen was less shocking. High praise. But then something strange happened. On day 2, we had 50 listeners. Day 3, 200. By the end of the week, we'd cracked 1,000, and the numbers kept climbing. I don't understand, I said, watching the dashboard with the fascination of someone discovering fire. Who are these people? They're leaving comments, Zach said, pulling up a reviews page. We leaned in to read. My dad passed away last year and this album sounds like him. Thank you. Finally, music about getting old that doesn't make it sound like the end. This is beautiful. I'm 67 and just started learning guitar. This gives me hope. Not gonna lie, clicked because I thought Geriatric garage band sounded funny. Stayed because this is genuinely brilliant. Track 4 made me cry. Then I called my estranged friend. We're meeting for coffee next week. Thanks, old dudes. There were hundreds of them. Thousands, eventually. People responding not to perfect production or technical virtuosity, but to something real. Something honest. We've gone viral, Zach said, barely containing his excitement. You're trending on TikTok. What's TikTok? We asked in unison. Never mind. Point is, people love you. A radio station in Manchester wants to interview you. So does the TV station. The actual TV station? Eddie's eyes were wide. The actual TV station. We looked at each other. 4 old people who'd set out to fulfill a promise and accidentally stumbled into something bigger. Well, Maggie said. This is unexpected. The interview requests kept coming. Local news, podcasts, music magazines. Everyone wanted to talk to the geriatric band that's captured hearts worldwide. Actual quote from The Guardian, which I've framed. We did a segment on broadcast radio too, talking to a very pleasant host who seemed genuinely interested in our story. She asked about our history, about the falling out, about why we decided to reunite now. Because life's too short for grudges, Eddie said simply. And because we had unfinished business. And how are you managing the Parkinson's diagnosis? She asked gently. Eddie paused. I could see him considering his answer, weighing privacy against honesty. Some days are harder than others, he said finally. But making this album, reconnecting with my friends, it's given me something to fight for. A reason to get up in the morning beyond taking my pills and feeling sorry for myself. That's beautiful, the host said. And I could hear the emotion in her voice. After the interview, we sat in the broadcast canteen, drinking terrible coffee and marveling at our strange new reality. My grandson thinks I'm cool now, Tommy said. He showed my album to his friends. His friends. My daughter cried when she listened to it, I said. Said she understood why I'd been so secretive. Said she was proud of me. Alice wants to renew our vows, Eddie said. Says Alice is the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for her, and she wants to celebrate while we still can. My wife just wants me to keep practicing in the garage instead of the living room, Maggie said. But she did say she's proud of me too. After she said that, we sat in comfortable silence. 4 old friends who'd somehow made it back to each other against all odds. You know what the best part is? Eddie said. We kept our promise. Took us nearly 50 years, but we did it. We did more than that, Maggie said. We made something that matters. Something that's helping people. Do you think we should do another album? Tommy asked. We all looked at him. I'm just saying, we've got momentum now. Strike while the iron's hot. Tommy, I said gently. We're all exhausted. Eddie can barely hold his bass for more than 20 minutes. My fingers feel like they've been through a war. And Maggie, I'm fine, Maggie interrupted. But Frank's right. We set out to make one album. We made it. Maybe that's enough. Maybe, Eddie agreed. Or maybe we take a break and see how we feel in 6 months. You might not be able to play in 6 months, Tommy said quietly. Eddie smiled. It was a sad smile, but peaceful. Then we'll have this. This perfect thing we made together. And that's not nothing. 3 months after the album's release, we performed live. Just once. A small venue in London. Well, small by London standards, which meant it held 500 people. All tickets sold out in 4 minutes. We're going to embarrass ourselves, I said backstage, my hands shaking with nerves and possibly early onset death. Probably, Eddie agreed. He looked pale, and his tremor was worse than usual. Alice had wanted him to cancel, but he'd refused. One last time, he'd said. That's all I need. Tommy was doing breathing exercises that sounded more like he was having an asthma attack. Maggie was the only calm one, stretching her vocal cords with exercises that sounded like she was summoning demons. Right, she said, turning to face us. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to walk out there. We're going to play our songs. Some of us will probably forget the words or the chords or what we're doing there entirely. And it will be beautiful, because it's real. I love you, Maggie, Tommy said. I know. Now let's go make some noise. The crowd roared when we walked on stage. Actually roared, like we were the Beatles or the Stones, instead of 4 elderly people who looked like we'd gotten lost on the way to a garden center. I plugged in my guitar. Eddie settled his bass. Tommy sat behind his drums. And his bucket. Maggie gripped the microphone like it was a lifeline. Hello, London, she said. And the crowd roared again. We're the Velvet Hammers, and we're still here. We launched into yesterday's tomorrow, and it was terrible and wonderful all at once. I flubbed the intro. Eddie's timing was off. Tommy hit his bucket when he meant to hit the snare. But the audience didn't care. They sang along. Actually sang along, to songs we'd written in Eddie's living room. Young people and old people, singing together, celebrating not perfection but the courage to keep creating, keep trying, keep living. By the time we got to Still Here, our anthem, Our battle cry. I had tears streaming down my face. So did Eddie. So did half the audience. I'm still here, still breathing. Still making noise despite the pain. I'm still here, still dreaming. Still learning how to live again. We finished to a standing ovation that lasted 3 minutes. 3 full minutes of people on their feet, applauding, cheering, celebrating not just us but themselves. Their own resilience, their own refusal to go gentle into that good night. Backstage, we collapsed into chairs, while Alice fussed over Eddie. And Sarah appeared to fuss over me. And Tommy's entire extended family materialized to take photos. We did it, Eddie said between gasps. We actually did it. We did, I agreed. No more though. I'm done. Completely spent. Agreed. I think I've aged another 10 years. Worth it? I looked at him. My oldest friend, my once enemy, my brother in all but blood. And smiled. Absolutely worth it. Epilogue. 6 months later. Eddie died on a Tuesday. Peacefully, Alice said. In his sleep, the way everyone hopes to go. The Parkinson's had progressed faster than anyone expected, but he'd made it to his grandson's wedding. Made it through Christmas. Made it long enough to see our album hit #1 on the UK indie charts. He was so proud, Alice told me at the funeral. Listened to it every day. Said it was proof he'd existed. That his life had meant something. It did, I said. He did. The funeral was packed. Family, friends, people from the neighborhood, and, bizarrely, fans. Young people who'd never met Eddie but felt like they knew him through his music. We played Alice during the service. Not the recorded version. The 3 of us, live, one last time. Maggie sang with her whole heart. Tommy played with tears streaming down his face. I made it through without completely falling apart, though it was close. Afterwards, at the wake, Alice pulled me aside. He wanted you to have this, she said, handing me a letter. I opened it with shaking hands. Frank. If you're reading this, I'm dead, which is both sad and somewhat inevitable given the circumstances. Try not to be too mopey about it. I lived a good life, and the last bit, our last hurrah, was the cherry on top. Thank you for forgiving me. For coming back. For helping me create something beautiful before I ran out of time. The album was good, but the friendship was better. Keep making music. Keep making noise. Don't let getting old be an excuse to stop living. Your friend always, Eddie. P.S. I never apologized for calling you a talentless hack. For the record, you're only moderately talentless. But mostly, you're brilliant. I laughed and cried at the same time, which made for an undignified spectacle, but I didn't care. We released a second album 2 years later. Just the 3 of us, with Eddie's bass tracks from our first sessions layered throughout like a ghost in the machine. We called it Tomorrow's Yesterday and dedicated it to him. It went to #3. I'm 76 now. My arthritis is worse. My memory's going. I can't play for more than 30 minutes without my hands cramping up. But every Sunday, Maggie, Tommy, and I meet in my garage. We play. We laugh. We remember. We're still here. And we're still making noise.